On next to Matt Wheeldon, and Matt is Director of Infrastructure Development at Wessex Water. He's been working as a chartered civil engineer for over 30 years, and he's got experience of working in water and wastewater, both in the UK and overseas. And in that, he's been an advocate for doing it right by nature, is my reading of your CV, Matt. He's also been working with politicians, both nationally and locally, just to bring a common sense and sustainable approach. So, Matt, water's been in the headlines for a number of years now. It's probably that kind of apex issue around nature and development. So, we're all ears. Over to you.
Brilliant. Okay, so I'm just going to start some big picture stuff. Many of you will know all about this, but it's really important to get the context right about the kind of environment that we find ourselves in. You all know that we have a rapidly changing climate. Here's some data from the Met Office, which is quite shocking. Our summers are getting warmer, and we've obviously already experienced one heat wave this summer. Now, a warmer summer doesn't necessarily mean a wetter summer, but it does mean a wilder summer. So the actual amount of rainfall in the summer is not necessarily increasing, but when it does rain, boy, does it rain much harder. And that's typical of a more tropical climate. Our winters are also getting warmer, and they are getting much wetter. And if we add summer, winter, spring, and autumn together, it looks a bit like this. So over the past 50 years, the average or the mean temperature in the UK has increased by 1.4 degrees. There's a thing called the Clausius-Clapeyron relationship, which talks about the relationship between air temperature and the amount of moisture it can contain. And it says that every 1 degree the atmosphere warms, it can hold 6 to 7% more moisture. And that's exactly what we've seen. Over the past 50 years, rainfall has increased by about 150 millimetres on average across the UK. So we're getting warmer years, we're getting wilder summers, we're getting wetter winters. So how we manage rain has got to change, because we're moving from a climate of drizzle to one of drought and then deluge. And so the assets that we build now, when we build new homes, has to reflect what the climate is going to be like in another. And if you look at the rate of change of those graphs in front of you and you project forward another 50 years, we're going to be in a very, very different environment. Not only because the climate is changing, but because we're also intervening with the climate through development. And you're probably aware of the housing growth targets for both Dorset and BCP. Human beings need to live under things that are impermeable. However, what happens to that runoff is really, really important, and not always particularly well managed, which I'll come on to in a bit. So here's the crazy thing. We're forecast to be running out of water, and that is because a lot of abstraction licenses that the EA permit are going to be reduced. This is to protect our rivers. Demand is also forecast to go up with the growing population. And so by 2055, there's a forecast supply-demand deficit of 5,000 megalitres a day. That is a lot less than the amount of water that is available to us. And that's the equivalent of 2,000 Olympic swimming pools a day. So on the one hand, we're running out of water, but on the other hand, there's plenty of water for us humans to survive. Lands in England is actually used by us as humans. And of the amount that we treat, only about 75% of that needs to be drinking water standard. The irony is we move from periods of too little water and too much water incredibly quickly. And getting water to people's taps is not a low energy business. In England last year, we supplied 4.6 cubic kilometres of drinking water to our customers. Now, each of these, and you probably don't hear about cubic kilometres much. We don't generally work in teralitres, but a teralitre is 1,000 billion kilograms. That's quite heavy. It's even heavier when you have to lift it about 100 meters in the air. And that's roughly what we're doing to get the water to your tap. In Wessex, it's about 130 meters to get the water from the source to your tap. Now, one of the crazy things is about a quarter of that huge amount of energy is less, in that we are providing high quality drinking water for non-potable purposes like flushing toilets or watering gardens. If I try and contextualize how much energy that is for a person, that's the equivalent of 1 kilogram, so a bag of sugar lifted twice the height of Mount Everest per person per day. That's how much energy we put in getting drinking water to your taps and your toilets. That's a huge amount of energy. On the wastewater side, obviously, we take everything back. And because the way our system has been built, a lot of rain is also added. About 50 to 80% more liquid on the wastewater side of the business than on the supply side of the business. These are England figures, by the way, not Wessex Water figures. And that's completely pointless, treating all this extra rain that has been added to the combined sewers. We're not really focused on where the problem is. The problem is the way our homes have been built and are being built. We fill our toilet systems with drinking water and we add rain to sewage. And one of the things that I'm trying to point out to people, that the solutions that are typical to try and address running out of water and having too much rain are centralized solutions. So people focus on building big reservoirs, there's lots going, strategic resource options, and also focus on too much water in the sewers by building huge storage tanks. Now, these centralized solutions, what they mean is that we end up storing, treating, and pumping and treating more. And centralized solutions have a massive, massive energy cost. This next slide shows you one of the planned centralized solutions. It's called pool final effluent transfer, where to protect the Hampshire Avon there on the right and the amount of water that is abstracted by Bournemouth Water, we're proposing to pump final effluent from pool sewage treatment works there on the bottom left up to another treatment works up by the Stour, and then put that into the river so that it can flow down the river and then be abstracted down at Longham for treatment so that it can come to your taps. We're also proposing to put more of it further upstream to maintain the flows in the River Stour during the summer. So this pipeline from pool up to the recycling centre at Corfmullen will be pumping at about 375 litres a second and lifting that water 100 metres in the air. So you imagine lifting a third of a tonne 100 metres in the air, how much energy we're putting in just to move this water so that we can put it into the river so that Bournemouth Water can abstract it so that they can then treat it so we can get it to our taps. So you can, I guess, already weight of the carbon footprint of centralized solutions. On the wastewater side, doing exactly the same thing. So these yellow diamonds are storm overflows that are being improved in the next 5 years. And the majority of these solutions are going to be big storage tanks. There's the big storage tank in front of Bournemouth Pier. You probably don't know it's there. It's huge. It's under the big wheel. And all these do is they store the contaminated rain so that it can be pumped out and then treated when the rain event has passed. Now, the problem we are building is we're stuck in this doom loop of a rapidly changing climate, more impermeable areas being built, centralized solutions to address water scarcity and storm overflows and flooding, which all have extreme embedded and operational carbon footprints, creating a rapidly changing climate. So the $6 million question is this: how can 100,000 new properties in Dorset and BCP be more sustainable? Well, the answer actually is quite straightforward if we harness and mimic nature. And to do that, there are two simple principles that are documented in a document that DEFRA have written, which are called the Rainwater Management Principles. And these are really quite straightforward. Rain is first and foremost a resource. We should capture it near it where it lands and use it where possible. We don't. We build homes that don't do that. Rainwater should be returned to the environment as close to where it landed as possible and never mix with sewage. Historically, we haven't done that. And even today, we don't put it close to where it landed. We don't mix it. It doesn't get mixed with sewage by developers anymore. Well, in most cases, but we don't necessarily put it right as close to where it landed. In simple words, we need to manage rain better where it lands. So if we look at how about half of the properties in England are built, you can see the two principles on the left-hand side with big red X's. We don't copy those principles. Properties are reliant on others to collect and dispose of this natural resource called rain. There are only very few organisations that collect the rain, but the rain lands on all of us. And so we've basically relied on buying a service in when nature is providing a lot of that service that we could use. The current approach is fractionally better. It doesn't get mixed with sewage, although developers still have a right to connect. We refuse and generally win, but we don't often return it right next to where it landed. You're probably familiar with communal SUDs being sustainable drainage systems. New development often moves that rain away from the property to the corner of the development where they build an attenuation pond, which is often fenced in. Often no one then maintains it. It's not passed over to the water company to maintain. And it's kind of missing the point, really, in that moving rain away from where it would go naturally isn't mimicking nature. So we could do things better, and quite simply we could do things better by actually looking at rain as a resource that lands on our properties. Enough rain lands on an average roof to supply all of that property's non-potable demands all year. Now, we don't have the infrastructure to do that with existing properties, but we could do that with new properties. Also, we tend to send the rain that we haven't used away. Well, actually, if we thought about trying to mimic nature, we would try and put that rain. One is it would encourage developers to build slightly larger, build a communal SUDs at the edge of the development, but each property could have a larger garden, and therefore the spin-off benefits are greater connectivity with nature in one's own garden. So then what we do is we move to a housing stock that is more self-reliant on the rain that lands on it and uses our drinking water and uses our wastewater system a lot less, and we'd be delighted. So why aren't developers building water assets that are fit for a future climate? Well, two reasons: they don't have to, and two, their base costs will increase. So some ideas: how do we tackle that? We can make them, rather government could make them by mandating rainwater harvesting for new build, as they have done it in Germany, mandating sustainable drainage systems for new build. So they could mandate that, following the hierarchy of rainwater management, that sustainable drainage systems need to be built at property level, if at all possible. And then there are a number of other things which I'm going to probably skip over because they're quite techy, that would help us manage rain better where it lands. The national SUD standards, which came out last July, have a great hierarchy in that they're not SUD standards anymore. They are rainwater management standards, because the first in the hierarchy, it says collect rain for non-potable use. But the problem is that these national standards are non-statutory guidance. So until it's put on a mandatory footing, it's very difficult for local authorities who all generally want the same thing to actually make it happen. The second way of doing it is to incentivize developers. Now, there's been an attempt by water companies to do this through environmental incentive payments. So that is reducing the cost for development to connect to the network by encouraging more water efficient homes, more sustainably drained homes. The problem we've got is that the incentive payments are not big enough to cover the additional costs. And if you go any bigger and actually make it worth their while, then who ends up paying? The existing customers. So it becomes a cross subsidy. I don't think that's what happens in energy. A large part of your standing charge goes into a central pot where others can then utilize that grant funding to put solar panels on their roofs. We haven't yet moved to that process in water, but I think maybe we need to. Let me summarize. The concept is catching rather. DEFRA certainly get it. They are now actively talking about managing rain where it lands, which is great because they're seeing the value of rain and the locality of where it gets returned. There is national research going on to help DEFRA with better policy decisions, and this is the exam question that is currently being asked. What is the evidence that managing rain better where it lands for both new and retrofitting development is better economically for society and the environment than centralised solutions? And hopefully that will demonstrate that if we harness nature and mimic nature, everyone is a winner. The customers who live in their properties are winners because they are less reliant on a centralised service, therefore they pay less. The environment is a winner because the centralised system, which has a much higher energy demand, uses less energy. People are more connected with nature, and we can live more sustainably. So we need to move from centralized solutions for water and drainage to more decentralized solutions, where we are harnessing this natural resource called rain, not seeing it as a burden, and then we are getting with locally as possible. In German, the German Federal Water Act puts a duty on every person to conserve water and that lands on their property and to not accelerate runoff from their property. What a great idea, giving people responsibility for the natural resource that lands on them and encouraging them to use it. A few catchphrases for you to take away. Manage rain better where it lands. This is a phrase, 6 words that is really getting through to the top of government. Do repeat it. It gets away from using tech language like integrated systems and holistic, which are words that people often use, but a lot of people don't understand. The 2 principles are all about harnessing nature and mimicking nature. Harnessing nature for use, mimicking nature for returning it. Keep raindrops lonely. Don't let them meet their friends. We have problems when properties are built at the bottom of hills, not because they flood themselves, because they're flooded by the people upstream. So we've just got to remember that rain flows downhill, and building stuff at the bottom of the hill is not a very sensible thing. And then as I work for a water company, my last takeaway soundbite is this: we want your poo, but please keep and use